Hello, I'm Kimberlie Acosta. Welcome to the Native News Update. It's Friday, December 3rd, and today we're talking with Paul DeMain, who's in Rapid City, South Dakota, covering the John Graham trial for the murder of Annie Mae Aquash in 1975. Paul, can you give us an update for IndianCountryTV.com and Native News Update on the John Graham trial?
Yeah, well, it's blistery weather out here in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I suspect this was the same time of the year that members of the American Indian movement brought Annie Mae Pictou Aquash to Rapid City, South Dakota to be interrogated, and sometime during the next 24 hours, 35 some years ago, she was executed. So far, this trial started on Monday with jury selection that lasted 2 days. Opening statements were done on December 1st, with both the prosecution opening up and the defense opening up their statements. And essentially, I think the prosecution has outlined the case as most people pretty much know it from the Arlo Looking Cloud trial, the Dick Marshall trial, and the guilty plea of Thelma Rios just here a couple of weeks ago. And that is that members of the American Indian movement, at the direction of the leadership in AIM, came to believe that Annie Mae Pictou Aquash may be a government informant. She was then picked up in Denver, Colorado at the home of Troy Lynn Yellowwood, Troy Lynn Williams, Troy Lynn Yellowwood, and was tied up down there. Now, there's some significance to that because we'll jump back to a little bit of this. Thelma Rios, a couple of weeks ago, pled guilty to being an accessory to kidnapping, which ended up in a murder. She pled guilty to that. She had served 90 days. She's on probation for 5 years, and she will be available for testimony. But essentially, the most important thing that Thelma Rios said, Kim, was that she made the phone call on behalf of leadership members of the American Indian movement, and she called Angie Begay, who is now known as Angie Janice, in Denver, Colorado. Angie Begay, in 1975, was living with John Boy Panton Graham. They were a partner, and Angie Begay had a daughter by Dennis Banks. So there was a connection with AIM and Dennis Banks in this whole scenario as well. Rios hasn't testified, and it may be that she may not have to, because basically Angie Begay says, I got the phone call from Thelma Rios directing us, members of the American Indian movement, to relay the message that Annie Mae needed to be brought back to Rapid City, South Dakota. Annie Mae then was taken into custody at Troy Lynn Yellowwood's home in Denver, Colorado, and that's where Angie Begay, during her testimony, said she did see Annie Mae tied up as they escorted her to the car that left for Rapid City, South Dakota. Troy Lynn Yellowwood gave more firmer testimony than ever before. She said on the stand that she hadn't been completely truthful because she was trying to protect Arlo Looking Cloud. It may be that with the Rios guilty plea that Troy Lynn is actually beginning to look at the possibility that she could be charged with perjury, and therefore she admitted that Annie Mae Aquash left Denver, Colorado against her will. She didn't want to go, but basically said that Annie Mae still at the very last moment says, look, don't worry about it, I'll just go. A third person testified by the name of George Palfy. Him and his wife were there, Angie, and George was there. He testified and actually corroborated then this whole scenario, that Annie Mae was kidnapped. She was taken against her will by Arlo Looking Cloud, Theda Nelson Clark, and John Boy Panton Graham. And he actually testified that was a third individual, Ida Williams, which would be Theda Nelson Clark's either, I believe, as she's a sister or another niece, because this is a kind of in a family affair as well. Palfy said that he saw Annie Mae tied up as well in Denver, Colorado. So that seems to be a fairly clear fact in this scenario.
And that was the testimony from December 2nd?
That testimony is from just on December 2nd. Yes, those individuals. Palfy, people have said that I wasn't there. People said that Palfy came across as a very credible witness in the situation, expressed a great deal of remorse for not having done more in 1975-76 when he began to realize that there's a connection between what happened there and the fact that he found her later on. But everyone was saying that it had to have been something else, that the timeline wasn't right, that she was alive. So George simply said that he felt like he should have done more. But out of that comes that scenario that you have the three principal people, and that is Arlo Looking Cloud, who's already been convicted of first-degree murder. He's serving a life sentence, who will probably testify next week that they took Annie Mae in custody, that she was tied up by Theda Nelson Clark, put in a car, and brought back to Rapid City, South Dakota, not as a cooperating witness or an individual, but someone who was reluctantly and actually needed to be tied up in Denver, Colorado. That's kidnapping. So I believe the feds and the state have established that there was a kidnapping between the Rios guilty plea and the testimony that she gave to prosecutors at that time and what we got out of the witnesses. I don't think there's going to be any denying that that's what's taken place. And that may be significant to this case because while Attorney Murphy, on behalf of John Graham, hammers away at the prosecution witnesses, essentially what he's been put on the table is no alibi or alternative theory at this point, and of course it's the prosecution witnesses. Basically what he's hammered away at is the fact that everyone has multiple testimonies and things going on, and so you're going to find the discrepancies. Some of these people testified in 1976 at a grand jury, 1984, 1992, 2001 grand juries. They made statements to police officers. They've testified in court. So Murphy's looking at every tiny little thing and says, well, this is what you said over here. This is what you didn't say over here. And all the witnesses, I think, so far have those discrepancies. But I think for the jury and myself, I'm kind of preconditioned on certain things because I've dealt with this case so long, that while you have this broad breadth of material coming in, it's beginning to get narrowed down. And people have said there's three people mainly involved with this at this point, and that's what the prosecution needs to convince the jury of. They don't need to talk about Dennis Banks and Vern Belcourt and Clyde Belcourt and Russell Means and their involvement yet, because that's may yet to come in the future. What they're trying to establish is whether or not John Graham was there throughout this ordeal. He has been accused of being the trigger man, the person that shot Annie Mae at the end of this 72-hour ordeal from Denver to Rapid City to Wambley. The prosecution doesn't have to prove that he's the shooter. They have to prove that he was involved in the kidnapping, that he understood that she was in danger, or you don't tie someone up unless you're serious about things, and he participated in it. And I think they've established that. He's been charged with kidnapping and the perpetration of first-degree murder, which is the same sentence as murder, but it's basically saying, well, you kidnapped her and she ended up dead and you were involved in it and knew it. That's what the state has to prove at this trial today. And so far, I think they've done it fairly well. There isn't anything that the defense has been able to throw out, I think, that's misled us. And that's just all on December 2nd.
And who was the witnesses today that testified?
Today, the witnesses started out with Cleo Gates. That is the ex-wife of Richard Marshall. Of course, earlier this week, Judge Delaney here said that Dick Marshall must testify next week. His attorney made several pleas. In fact, his attorney's still apparently trying to work something out where Dick Marshall doesn't have to testify. But remember, Dick Marshall was acquitted of murder in the first degree earlier this spring. He's the one that provided the gun. Jury acquitted him. He said he intended to plead his Fifth Amendment if he was called. And they gave him immunity from any potential charges other than perjury. And the judge has ordered him that said that you will testify and you will be open to the charge of perjury if you lie. Because essentially, Marshall's attorney, Dana Hanna, says, look, what they're trying to do is get my client up on the stand, and if he lies, they'll send him to jail on a third strike for the Montaloo murder charge. So Cleo Gates testified this morning that they indeed did bring that Theda Nelson Clark, John Graham, Arlo Looking Cloud, she identified along with Annie Mae, came to her house. They said that one of the individuals escorted her into their house and sat her down. That Dick Marshall and the trio, while Cleo was in the kitchen, she gave a cup of coffee to Annie Mae and gave her a donut. That while she was doing that, the trio went back into the back room and talked. Dick Marshall came out and said they want us to keep Annie Mae in the basement of the house. They're talking about maybe tying her up and keeping her down. This is something that Cleo apparently had not testified to do because Murphy got up right away during cross and said, "Look, you never said anything about these guys saying." Well, she says Dick Marshall says they're talking about keeping her here. They want maybe talk about tying her up if they have to. The other thing they noted is that Annie Mae didn't run. She wasn't tied up at this particular point. There was a front door, the back door. She didn't ask for help. There's a telephone. But Cleo said that Annie Mae didn't say anything. She basically offered a cup of coffee and she said, yeah, offered some soup. She said no. But at this particular point, it appears that you're dealing with someone that's deeply terrified because Annie Mae for about a month and a half now had been dealing with the accusations of murder, of being an informant. Excuse me. She had been at the Marlo Brando motorhome. She had witnessed the alleged Peltier confession to shooting the agents. There was people saying that she was an informant. She was under a lot of stress and anxiety. She was kidnapped. By the time they got there, Cleo basically says she's not arguing, talkative. She's not saying anything. She's just sitting there. And so it's kind of the state of the mind. So Cleo, definitely, now they put the trio at Dick Marshall's that night. The second witness of the day was Candy Hamilton, who basically talked about the issue of Aquash's interrogation at the Wickledock house. And Hamilton had talked about Annie Mae being interrogated there, who she saw, that she assumed that Bruce Ellison was there, that she heard the voices of Madonna Gilbert and Lorelei DeCoria. Madonna Gilbert is Madonna Thunder Hawk nowadays, through the walls of the building there at the little Wickledock house where they brought Annie Mae. But again, Candy testified that Annie Mae was not tied up during a particular period, though she was crying and very distressed. The significant thing that Candy said, interesting enough, was that during the time period that she was involved with Wickledock as a legal advisor was that there was an attorney that expressed the desire that this case not be looked into it, and that was attorney Ken Tilson out of Minneapolis, a person very close to Vernon and Clyde Belcourt, the person who was in charge along with Vernon Belcourt for fetting out the informants within the American Indian movement, an attorney who received the wallet of Annie Mae in 1976, February, March, and rather than giving it to federal authorities or the FBI or anyone else invested in this case, sent it back to Nova Scotia without it being examined by law enforcement officials during that time period. Ken Tilson was then the attorney for Dick Marshall in the Montaloo murder case. So that's an interesting connection that seems to be emerging as well. Throughout the day, we've heard the names Leonard Peltier several times in regards to this case now. It's not just Kamuk Nichols did come on and testify, and actually the judge is preventing her from testifying about the alleged bragging incident in the Marlo Brando motorhome that was allowed in the federal court. But Leonard Peltier's name has been mentioned numerous times this morning, along with Dennis Banks, Russell Means, Vernon Clyde Belcourt, as leaders and people who could have facilitated this thing. But again, that's not the attention of the prosecution or the jury's responsibility at this particular point. That may still be coming. So
we're just about out of time here. So they're going to continue with the trial on December 6th, and we'll catch up with you then, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Kim, that's the briefest update we can do for IndianCountryTV.com today. Thanks for having me in.
And that's the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. I'd like to thank you for joining me, and have a grand day.